There is a kind of silence that has weight to it, not the peaceful kind, the kind that sits on a person's chest after they have stopped expecting anyone to come. Eli Mercer had driven into the Whitfield property looking for a horse, a bay gelding Silas had advertised in town. Simple transaction. In and out before the noon heat got mean. But the moment he stepped through the stable door and let his eyes adjust to the dim light inside, something stopped him cold. She was sitting on the ground with her back against the wall, knees pulled tight to her chest, wearing nothing but a torn shirt that barely covered her legs. Sunlight pushed through the gaps in the boards and fell across her skin in pale stripes, revealing bruises in shades of yellow and purple that hadn't had time to fade. When Eli's shadow crossed her, she flinched. The way a person flinches when they have learned that a shadow usually means something is coming. He removed his hat slowly. Careful. Like he was approaching something wounded in the wild. That was when he noticed the latch. It had been fastened from the outside. Then the iron ring bolted into the wall. Then the chain lying in the straw near her feet. Then the marks on her wrist where the skin had been rubbed raw. She opened her mouth to speak, swallowed hard, and forced the words out in a voice scraped thin from disuse. My father. 3 times a day. Her eyes moved to a post beside her. 3 shallow cuts had been carved into the wood, evenly spaced, not frantic scratches, deliberate ones. Morning, midday, night. She wasn't crying. There are people who have moved past the point where tears come easily. She was one of them. He drinks. Then he comes. And then he locks the door. The heat inside that stable was the kind that presses down on you. But what Eli felt in his chest had nothing to do with the temperature. He had known Silas Whitfield for years. Small-time horse trader. Familiar face at the Long Branch Saloon in Dodge City. Silas had mentioned a daughter once. Said she was difficult. Unstable. That she needed a firm hand. Folk around town knew his debts were piling up, and there had been quiet talk about a girl's name appearing on paperwork that could make those debts go away. What Eli was looking at now was not instability. It was not wildness. It was a human being who had been reduced to counting the hours between one locked door and the next. Her name was Clara Whitfield. 18 years old enough to make her own choices. But in Ford County in the 1880s, an unmarried daughter was still considered her father's property under the long shadow of custom and law. And she was watching Eli the way a trapped animal watches a hand reaching toward it. Not sure yet whether the hand holds a key or a chain. Outside, boots crunched on gravel. Silas was coming back from the well. Here is the thing about moments like this one. They do not announce themselves as turning points. They just arrive. And a person has to decide in a matter of seconds what kind of man they are. Eli had stood silent in a situation like this once before, years back, in a different county with a different family. He had told himself it was none of his business. He had told himself the law would sort it out. He had ridden away. And he had carried that ride with him ever since. He was not about to carry another one. Silas Whitfield stopped 3 steps from the stable door when he found Eli standing there. He set his bucket down and put on a smile that didn't travel as far as his eyes. She gets dramatic in the heat, he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Girls got a wild streak. Eli didn't step aside. He didn't raise his voice either. He just held his ground, blocking the view into the stall. The door is latched from the outside, Eli said. Silas shrugged like that was the most reasonable thing in the world. She runs off, he said. I keep her close. That's what raising a child looks like. Clara had not made a sound. She hadn't moved to defend herself, hadn't spoken. Eli had walked in looking for a horse and found something that changed the shape of the afternoon entirely. He kept his voice even, the kind of level tone that men use when they are testing how far another man will push. I'll take the gelding, Eli said, and I'll hire her for the drive back to my ranch. Need an extra pair of hands. I'll pay fair. Silas's smile thinned down to a line. She ain't for hire, he said. She ain't livestock either, Eli replied, and that was enough to break whatever thin patience Silas had left. He came forward without warning, nothing but whiskey breath and swinging fists. The first punch caught Eli in the shoulder. The second never landed. Eli was not a young man. He was not fast the way young guns are fast, but he was steady. He caught Silas by the shirt, drove him back hard into the stable wall, and the whole structure shook with the impact. A horse kicked inside its stall. Dust filled the air. Silas swung wild. Eli kept it close and controlled. One clean hit to the ribs. One shove that sent Silas stumbling backward into a feed barrel. Clara moved then. Not much, just enough. She grabbed a handful of straw and flung it straight into her father's face. It was not a heroic gesture. It was a desperate one. The act of someone who had finally decided that doing something, anything, was better than waiting for the next blow. It was enough. Eli reached for the latch key hanging from a nail on the wall and unlocked the stall door. Silas coughed and tried to push himself upright. Eli stepped between him and the girl and kept his eyes level and cold. "If I ever hear you've laid a hand on her again," he said, "I'll be back with the law, and I won't be alone." Minutes later, Eli's wagon rolled away from the Whitfield property. Clara sat beside him, wrapped in an old canvas coat he kept behind the seat. She didn't look back once. Behind them, Silas stood alone in the yard, eyes quiet and calculating. He wasn't thinking about fists anymore. He was thinking about something far more dangerous than fists. He was thinking about paper, and Silas Whitfield knew exactly how to use that. Now, before this story goes any further, think about what just happened in that stable, because it isn't just a tale from 1880s Kansas. The pattern you just watched, a person slowly controlled through isolation, routine, and fear, that pattern didn't stay in the past. It shows up in homes, in workplaces, in relationships today. The method changes. The chains are not always iron. But the counting of hours, the bracing for footsteps, the silence learned over time, those are ancient and they are real. Stay with this story, because what comes next is going to ask you something harder than what to do when you see it. It's going to ask what you do when the law itself becomes the weapon. Eli's wagon carried them out of Dodge City before the afternoon had time to breathe. He didn't push her with questions. They crossed the Arkansas River at a shallow bend, the wheels grinding slow over the stone bottom. By the time the sun started leaning west, the shape of his ranch came into view across the flat land. Eli handed Clara a tin cup of water and told her she was safe there. She nodded, and her eyes went somewhere distant, like a person doing arithmetic on time, calculating how long safety ever actually lasts. That first evening, when the shadows stretched long, Clara went rigid. Eli noticed without saying anything. It was one of those hours. Instead of acknowledging it, he asked her to help carry feed to the horses. "Keep moving. Keep your hands busy. Break the rhythm the fear has built into your body." When the moment passed and no footsteps came through a locked door, something small shifted in the way she held her shoulders. Not trust, not yet, but a hairline crack in the wall. The next morning, Eli rode into Dodge City and stopped at the sheriff's office. Tom Callahan was inside with his boots up on the desk and his hat tipped back. He listened without interrupting. Locked stall. Marks on her wrists. 3 times a day. Tom rubbed his jaw slowly when Eli finished. "You stepped into something deep," he said. "I know," Eli replied. Tom leaned forward then, dropping his voice. "Silas filed a complaint this morning. Says you took his daughter against her will. Men over at the Long Branch owe him favors." There it was. Not a bruise, not a fist. Paper. Law. Silas had not chased them down the road. He had gone straight to the badge. Tom wasn't accusing anyone. But he wasn't smiling either. In this county, Tom said carefully, a father still carries weight. Eli nodded. He understood. Out here, blood often spoke louder than bruises. When Eli returned to the ranch that afternoon, He found Clara standing at the fence watching the horizon the way a person watches a road they know something bad will come down eventually. She must have felt it in the air, because just before the sun touched the earth, she said something in a low voice that tightened every muscle in Eli's chest. "He won't stop," she whispered. And far down the road that led from Dodge City, a thin line of dust had already begun to climb into the summer sky. The dust came in thicker as the riders drew closer. Clara saw it before Eli said a word. She didn't panic. That was the hard part to watch. She just went still. The stillness of someone who has spent years understanding that running changes nothing. Eli stepped off the porch and rested one hand on the fence rail. He counted 3 riders. Silas in front, 2 men from town behind him, the kind who spent more time propping up saloon walls than building anything honest. No badge among them. Not yet. They pulled up hard in the yard. Silas swung down from his horse with his eyes bright and mean. "You got something that belongs to me," he called out. Eli kept his voice flat. "She ain't a saddle." One of the other men spat in the dirt. "This don't need to get ugly," he said, though it already was dressed for it. Clara stepped down from the porch then. She stayed behind Eli, but she didn't hide. That one thing mattered more than Eli knew in that moment. Silas saw it too, and something in his face shifted. Not anger. Control. The specific frustration of a man who realizes the person he has been breaking has stopped bending. "You think he'll keep you?" Silas snapped at her. "You think this old rancher wants all your trouble following him around?" Eli kept his eyes on Silas and didn't turn. "You filed a complaint," he said. "Sheriff knows where she is. We can ride into town and settle this the right way." Silas laughed. "We'll settle it here," he said, and stepped forward. What followed was fast and close and ugly. A shove, a wild swing, one of the hired men trying to circle wide toward the porch. Eli moved before the circle closed. He drove his shoulder into Silas, taking both of them into the dirt. No guns drawn. Just fists and breath and the grit of the yard between clenched teeth. Silas fought the way angry men fight, wild and desperate. Eli fought the way steady men fight. One clean punch split Silas's lip open. Another put him flat on his back staring up at the sky. The second man backed away when Clara grabbed a fence post and shouted for them to stop. Not a frightened shout. A commanding one. And something in the air changed when she did. Silas lay in the dust, chest heaving. "You don't understand," he muttered, blood at the corner of his mouth. She signed it. Eli stopped moving. "Signed what?" Silas's eyes flicked toward Clara. A crack in the story. A mistake made by a man who hadn't planned on being put on his back. The 2 men behind him exchanged a look. This was no longer just a father chasing a runaway daughter. This was about something written down. About land. Silas pushed himself up slowly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "You want law?" he said, voice gone low and deliberate. "Fine. Let's bring it to town." He mounted up without another word. The 3 riders turned back toward Dodge City, with the dust rising behind them. Clara stepped down from the porch slowly after they were gone. "He made me sign something," she said, barely above a whisper. And for the first time, Eli understood the full shape of what had been happening in that stable. It was never just about control. It was about land. Her mother's land. A small piece of property along the Arkansas River that had passed to Clara when her mother died. And land in Kansas in the 1880s could ignite battles that fists alone never could. The next morning, Dodge City felt like it was holding its breath. Silas stood inside the sheriff's office with dried blood still on his collar, and the particular pride of a man who believes the law is a tool he alone knows how to use. Clara stood a few feet away with her hands steady at her sides. Eli did not speak for her. He stood beside her. Sometimes that is the whole difference. Tom Callahan laid the paper on his desk. A land transfer, her late mother's property along the river. Signed? Yes. But signed by a girl who had been locked in a stall 3 times a day until she stopped arguing. Signed under conditions that had no business standing in any court that deserved the name. Silas tried to call it family business. Tom cut him off before he finished the sentence. "This isn't raising a child," Tom said. He looked at Clara then. "Did you sign this freely?" She lifted her chin and looked him straight in the eye. "No." One word. No trembling. No tears. Just one word, clear as a bell. Silas was taken into custody that afternoon. The deed was set aside pending formal review. By sundown, the story had ridden out past Dodge City, from the saloons to the church steps, and folk were arguing about it clear out to the next county. Here is what that summer in Kansas actually teaches, and why it matters today. Control rarely announces itself as control. It builds slowly, through routine and isolation, through making a person count the hours between moments of relief. The most dangerous chains are the ones a person stops noticing because they have been wearing them so long. What broke the pattern in that stable wasn't a dramatic rescue. It was one person deciding that silence was no longer something they were willing to choose. Clara throwing that handful of straw wasn't strategy. It was the moment she stopped waiting for permission to act. The question that story leaves behind is not about 1880s Kansas. It's about right now. Where in your own life are you still counting marks on a post? What fear has become so familiar that you've built your whole day around it without questioning it anymore? What voice in your head? What habit? What situation have you been accepting as unchangeable simply because you've been inside it long enough that the walls feel normal? The clock that controls a life is almost never made of time. It's made of fear, and fear only keeps its grip as long as no one is willing to say a single clear word against it. Sometimes that word is no. Sometimes it's enough. Sometimes it's just the act of standing up when every part of you has been trained to stay down. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment and tell me which part landed hardest. Tell me what time it is where you're listening from and what corner of the world you call home. Every story shared here is gathered and retold with care. Some details are shaped to sharpen the lesson and bring it closer to the truth of human experience, while the images you see are crafted with care to match the weight of the words. If this kind of storytelling speaks to you, stay with us. There are more stories ahead, and one of them just might be the one that helps you finally stop counting.